suppose it's all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him, her, or it?
I will basically, that is theodicy, I think. I'll say, bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? That's what I'd say.
And you think you're going to get in on that?
But I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to get in on his terms. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac. Utter maniac. Totally selfish. Totally. We have to spend our life on our knees thanking him? What kind of God would do that? Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. And why? Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It is simply not acceptable.
Well, that's a pretty powerful argument. Yeah, it is the nub of one of the most frequent protests against the Western Christian conception of God that many atheists and agnostics would offer. How could you believe in a God? How could you invest faith in a God that is so capricious and uncaring that he would allow this kind of suffering? It's unfair, right? Well, a couple of thoughts come to mind immediately. One is that it reminds me to hear Fry's perspective on things. It reminds me how unmoored we have become from nature. As an example of how much things have changed, when I was a young boy, we had chickens in our yard, and I would gather the eggs every single day. Was it fair that I was taking those hens' creations and consuming their future babies? Was that fair? Was it fair that we had them cooped up and confined for our benefit? I mean, you could make an argument, about the unfairness of their imprisonment and the exploitation of these creatures for, our human needs. Take it a step further, and there would be times when I was responsible for going out and bringing dinner into the house, a chicken. So I would go out to the chicken coop. I would catch a chicken. I would put my hands around that chicken's neck, and I would wring that chicken's neck. It would break its neck quickly, less than a couple of seconds, and it was all over. Then we would clean the chicken. You'd have to pluck all the feathers. Stinky work. Usually have to boil the chicken, put the chicken in some really hot boiling water in order to loosen the feathers and make it easier to pluck the feathers. And after you'd pluck the chicken, then you'd have to clean the chicken, and you'd have to, eviscerate it and then cut it up and cook it. And so from start to finish, from being a creature in the yard that I may have named and fed on a regular basis, to catching that creature and killing that creature and preparing that creature and eating that creature, all within the span of less than 2 hours. So this life cycle thing, it was just a little closer to the ground. It was we lived this thing. Now compare what I've described, going out, grabbing that chicken, killing that chicken, to going through the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A, which is where we are today, or picking up a package of chicken breasts in the grocery store. That's a long, long, long way away from the reality of what is involved in getting that chicken into your stomach. And we are so far removed from the reality of it that we have lost a sense of nature, of the intelligence of nature, of the way its workings. Yeah. It's only when you have become so ensconced in civilization and have risen so far above the daily realities of life and death that you can recline and kind of have this thought that it's unfair. It's not a matter of fair or unfair. It's not a matter of good or bad. It is a matter of what is. And when you are close to animals and we live closer to nature and the daily rhythm and reality of it, these kinds of abstractions just reveal themselves for what they are, just not based in reality. They are on this abstracted layer that we've talked about. That's one thought that comes to me. The other thought that comes to me is compared to what? It's capricious and unfair compared to what? Compared to humans? Compared to our moral compass that we demonstrate on a daily basis? Have we demonstrated ourselves capable of assuming a posture that is superior to what we observe in nature so that we could say, if this was designed, it was a really bad design because we are in a position to be able to judge that based on the way we comport ourselves ethically and morally. I see no great evidence among humans that elevate us to a place of, yeah, God, you really messed this up. That's not fair. I wonder where do we derive our standing from? And what would be more fair? What would be less capricious? We understand, Stephen, that death is necessary, right? Death is a necessity. Is that unfair? Is it unfair that things have to die at all? Some would make that argument. It's a very naive and childlike argument, but some would say that death is unfair altogether. Life requires death. Life requires that living things consume other living things. Is that fair? It is what is. So if it's not fair that people die at a very young age or that they have diseases, when would it be fair for people to die? If we say, okay, all right, it's not right, it's not fair that people have to die, or that more broadly, that life has to end. But if it does, when should it end? If we're going to be fair about it, what's a good long life where you would feel it's not unfair that it ended at this age? 30, 40 years ago, living to 70 would be a good ripe age. Yeah. Now I think we expect that, probably 80 is a decent age. Is that fair? Is it fair that a person who is full of their, faculties and still able to navigate life effectively, is it fair that they would die at 80? I don't think there is any fair age to die at. I think that there is a wisdom that certain things have to die because that's just the way it is. I think that dying, this randomness of life, this unpredictability of life, is part of what makes it precious. It's part of, if we are wise and we are mindful of its preciousness, encourages us to to live life as fully as we can every single moment that we are aware of this condition that we're in. And if we thought it was more fair that everyone should live until 100 years old, how much would people be putting things off? Oh, I'll start that when I'm in my 50s, or I'll start that when I'm 90, when it really gets down to the short hairs of life. Nah. So what else? How else can we look at this? I think that when we think about this idea of the unfairness of this, the cruelty of this insect larva, insect burrowing its larva into a human eye. How unfair, how cruel. What a mean God would do that. Well, that's kind of the other problem in the conception that Fry has. And I think this is a common riff when atheists talk about religion, is that more often an atheist is arguing against religion and rather than arguing against the existence of God. And usually when folks like Fry are taking down Christians, they take down the religion, which is a fairly easy thing to do, right? Humans and everything in the human enterprise is really vulnerable to criticism, including science, because humans take themselves everywhere they go. All of our foibles, all of our weaknesses, they're all with us every single where we go, and we have yet to engineer it out of ourselves. Science is really no safe harbor for us. I think we have done a good job with some of the structures and the frameworks that we have in science, but it's still a human enterprise and still subject to all the weaknesses that we have as humans. But when we criticize, religion, that's fairly easy work. It gets more complicated when we have to deal with the existence of a creator, the existence of a higher power. Then we get into this. The Taoists say that the more we talk about the Tao, which is roughly their conception of God, the further we get away from it. The more words you use, the less you say. That's instructive here. This is very etheric stuff we're getting in here, when we start talking about the nature of our existence and the nature of a creator. We get into very deep water very quickly. And I am always require myself as much as I can to try to be humble about these discussions, because I do not have the answer. I promise you I don't. It's not for lack of trying. I have dedicated my life to exploring lots of these ideas, and it's an endless pursuit. It's a worthy pursuit, but it is a frustrating and endless one that continually unfolds and reveals itself to be deeper and more profound a mystery than you could have ever imagined, than I could have ever imagined when I first began this, walking on this path of understanding and discovery. I thought my mind could get me there. It can't. Yet, here we are wrestling with this idea of this creator. And I think one of Fry's challenges is he is stuck so much in the framework of a Christian deity, the Christian conception of a deity, which is an anthropomorphic one, where we assign it these human characteristics and these aspects of personality. And I don't buy into that, okay? I don't buy into the anthropomorphic conception of a God. I get it. I understand as a narrative device that myth and story make it a very powerful and compelling way of conceiving a God. But I don't limit myself to that conception. So when Fry talks about the unfairness and the cruelty of this insect that is burrowing this larva into an eye, I don't think of this like a God who is saying, "Oh, it would be really cruel. It'd be really messed up. As if I could have them do this. Wouldn't that be really super sick to do that?" No. That's when you anthropomorphize, then you think through this decision and this design process in that way. And it's just really odd to me. Instead, I think that this intelligence, this consciousness, this creator doesn't have these aspects of personality. It is transcendent, and it is non-judgmental in the way that humans are judgmental. It looks at our existence without emotion. The insect that is burrowing the larva into the eye of a human is no different than the squirrel building a nest in the hole of a tree. I have one right outside my window here. There's a hole in this pecan tree, and squirrels have made nests in there for decades. It is a rabbit burrowing into the ground. It is that non-judgmental. It is, I need to ensure my survival, so I'm going to plant my seed, my larva, in this place. I'm not thinking about the fairness of it. I am thinking about the necessity of it for my survival. And so I think that might be another way of looking at this. If you get outside of this rational thinking mind of a God that you have reduced to be some proxy for the way your mind operates, then I guess these cruel, this cruel reading of this design, I guess that you could make an argument for that. But I just want to encourage you to step beyond this anthropomorphic model to a non-judgmental one where it is just a survival trait. It is just something that has to be done. It's not cruelty. It is a necessity. Fairness. My mother had cancer throughout her life. For as long as I could remember, I remember being a 5-year-old boy and, having my mother taken off to the hospital in an ambulance. Many times throughout my childhood, many major cancer operations, a lot of suffering my mother went through. When I think beyond this good and bad, this fair and unfair, my mother's voice rings in my memory. She would say, instead of saying, "Why me, God?" she would often say to me, "Why not me, Rick? I'm no better than anyone else. Why shouldn't this happen to me? All of us are going to die from something. This is just the something that happened to grab me. I'm no better than anyone else." And so part of my reaction to Stephen Fry is also this kind of species narcissism. Is it any more unfair that calf died than that young child died? Is death more awful in certain species than in others? What can we do? I think that when I hear Fry talk, I hear someone who is suffering and struggling with a conception that is unfair, about this unfairness of a God, this capricious God. What can we do? Well, one way is to eliminate unnecessary suffering. One way is to say, okay, within this trope that I have about religion and Christianity in particular, I've repeated that criticism over and over and over again, this argument against God. I've said it for decades. Let me put a pause button on that same old saw, that same old argument. Unfair, cruel, how could it, how could you believe in something like this? Well, how could you not believe in something like this would be what I would ask you to do. How can you believe that there may be a conception of a creator that is different than the conception that you have been holding on to, lo, these many years? That there are other people around the world who think of this creator, God, in a different way than you do, and that there might be something that you can learn from the way they think about it, in a way that makes the world a little less shadow, a little more light, or at least a little more balance. So, step outside the aperture of your operation. God is like this. Widen the straw as wide as you can. Eliminate frameworks, eliminate judgment, eliminate these ideas of how I've always thought about things, you've always thought about things, and allow yourself to think about it in a different way. And just sit with that and see how it makes you feel. How does it make you feel to think about God in a different way? That's what we're thinking about. Peace.